And they don't know, it's your brother YK the Truth. And in this video, I will be debunking Kurimeo's Spit Here and Know Your Tribe video. Don't go nowhere. This is going to be deep. And I'm going to use his own source.
Hi.
Hello, Dr. Gravel.
Welcome to the lab. Nice to meet you.
And show you that his own source says that we come from Africa. Okay? So Kurimeo, you have to hold this L, bro. You have to hold it. Because if you believe that he's right about DNA, you must also believe that he is right, that we come from West Africa.
5 different sets of results?
Hi.
Hello, Dr. Gravel.
Welcome to the lab. Nice to meet you.
He is a population geneticist at McGill University in Montreal.
Last time you saw your DNA, I'm guessing it was in a little tube like this.
I spit in quite a few of those,
That's
yes.
right. So once you send those to the companies, they'll take your saliva, they clean it up, they will break down the cells so they can free the DNA, and then clean the DNA, break it into small pieces, and then they lay it out on one of these chips here.
So if we look at that chip, will my spit on this chip tell me that definitively I am Italian or definitively I'm from wherever?
No. There's a lot of steps that go in between, a lot of statistical interpretation and models, and whose genome your genome is being compared to. It's not 100% sure. So statistics tell us in our model what's the best situation. It is a statistical guess.
Yeah.
It's an informed guess, but it's never a 100% sure thing.
Okay.
Timothy Caulfield is a health policy professor who studies the Ancestry business.
It's an exciting story, right? It's about you, right? And so I get why they're doing it, but is it really what's happening? Can they really be that accurate? I think they're selling something that isn't really supported by the science.
What do you think about the messages that are being sent to consumers?
I think it's misleading. These companies are really trying to push the idea that this is scientific, right? They are using scientific language and they present it in a way that looks very sciencey and precise.
Caulfield says what people are really buying is entertainment.
I think it's recreational science. They can have a little bit of fun with this stuff. Don't take it too seriously, but know that you are just getting some information that is an approximation of how your DNA compares to other people. It's not tracing back your heritage.
You see, family, this is how we do our research. We don't take a person's word for it. So this is the man who believes that DNA is for entertainment purposes, all right? Timothy Caulfield. He has a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor's of Law, Masters of Law. He's a Canadian researcher. He is not a geneticist. Nowhere did you hear Gravel, Simon, say that DNA is for entertainment purposes. We don't go to the geneticist, we go to the law guy with a Bachelor's of Science who's not even qualified to speak on genetics, on DNA. You're not. But this is your source, Kurimeo. This is why I say this is going to be the illest checkmate right now. Because you can't twist the information to the people. So I got one of your sources out of here. Let's get the Canadian researcher out of here. Now, let's see what the other guy, the population geneticist, let's see what he says about Black people in America and West Africa and how they got here. Kurimeo, take that whole video down. Take it down. Get it out of here. That's one video that should no longer be on your channel. It's been up there for 2 years. Bring it down. Bring it down now. You can't go to a Canadian researcher. He's not a geneticist. Just like you shared that 60 Minutes, right, with a law professor.
Hank Greeley, a law professor at Stanford University,
over a black geneticist, a black scientist.
he included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa.
And a news reporter trying to tell a geneticist that he's wrong about genetics. And these are the people that's telling you you are an Indian. And you believe them because you don't research for yourself. Now let's go.
Back in Montreal, Gravel agrees.
These specific percentages should not be interpreted as like definitive, like here's your percentage ancestry from this place. Like that's not that.
Now, this is Simon Gravel. This is the population geneticist. This is the second source from that video. All right. So we got the Canadian researcher out of there. Now, let's see what Simon Gravel says about the black people that's in America and where they originate and where they migrated from. Let's see if he believes what you believe, Kurimeo. You know what I mean? So if he's right about DNA being, not that accurate, he's also right that we come from West Africa, right? I mean, he knows it all, right? So let's beat you up with your own source. Let's go. Okay, so this is an article in genomeweb.com, all right? And Mr. Simon Gravel did a study. Now, it says genetic makeup of African American populations influenced by ancestry bias migrations. Okay? Now let's get it. It says, based on genetic data, a McGill University-led team has traced the movements of African American populations in the U.S. based on what? Genetics. And how do you find out whose genetics is what? You take a DNA test, right? So clearly, Mr. Simon Gravel believes that DNA testing is more accurate than he wants you to believe on that show, right? Now let's go. As they reported today in PLOS Genetics, McGill's Simon Gravel and his colleagues studied the migration history and genomic diversity of African Americans by drawing on a cohort of more than 3,700 African Americans who undergone genotyping. Okay? So we're using some form of DNA. From this, the researchers estimated that about 82% of African American ancestors could be traced to Africa. Hold on. Let me rewind that again, because I'm beating you up with your own source. Let me repeat it. From this, the researchers estimated that about 82% of African American ancestors could be traced to Africa.
So in the first day when we talked about climate change, we heard that the trade was actually a very good source of reliable records because trade is very important. So the ships that went to the Americas to collect gold, we have very good records of those and their wreckages because this was considered a very important industry. There's another industry that was also considered very important and very lucrative, and of course is very important for African American history, and that's the transatlantic slave trade. And actually, because we have very good records, which are compiled on the Slave Voyages website, people have generated these nice animations where we can see each boat as an individual dot. And we have, if you go on the website and you can click on the dot, and each dot represents dozens to hundreds of individuals who were forcibly brought to the Americas. Okay. And you can see there's all these interesting patterns that your eye can pick up. One of them is that obviously slavery and slave trade was a general, an industry that all colonial powers used, and individuals were brought into all parts of the Americas. The United States was an enthusiastic, but not one of the largest players, in the sense that more individuals were brought into the Caribbean and into Brazil compared to the United States. Things really picked up in the 1700s, and you can see all the different patterns of connections between the countries that colonial powers controlled on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, the United States was one of the first countries to ban international slave trade in 1808. And so you can see that as we get closer to 1808, there's going to be one last burst of trade, and then things stopped. Okay, so that was because international trade was controlled by the North, which was mostly anti-slavery. But the United States continued to run slavery within the United States until the end of the Civil War in roughly 1865. So the US was one of the first countries to ban international slave trade and one of the last countries to ban slavery. And one of the consequences of this was that in the US there was much more natural population growth among the enslaved population. Okay, so if I break down this slave trade by regions within the US, so here I broke down the arrival place of enslaved individuals across the coast here. So you have the north here in green, the Chesapeake Bay area. So this is near Washington, D.C. It's right at the border between the traditional north and south in the US. You have the south here, the Carolinas and Georgia, and you have the Gulf states. And one thing you can see is that, well, firstly, there's approximately 400,000 individuals who were brought in and who survived the voyage. The vast majority of individuals were brought in the south or near the south. And because of changes in the economy, these people were then forced to march inland towards the plantations, which were also predominantly in the south. Okay? So these here are cumulative graphs of arrivals. I should say there's this one interesting feature here, that international slave trade was abolished in 1808. You can see that in the Gulf states, there's still more arrivals of enslaved people. So what happened then is that, you can go and look at the actual ships that arrived. And so these were Spanish ships that were captured by the US Navy, who said, well, I mean, there was war. Also, international slave trade was illegal, so the merchandise, humans, were seized as merchandise. But because slavery was still allowed, these individuals were still sold into slavery, right? There was kind of a loophole that people used a little bit, but this was stopped a little bit later. And so we have all these interesting things that we can go back and forth and discuss with historians. But maybe the most important thing for us is to discuss this with geneticists, because if historians knew about the Great Migration, I mean, the great majority of geneticists don't know about these historical processes, at least non-African American geneticists. And so one of the things that John mentioned is that it's important when we do these association studies and these medical studies to account for population structure and to build into your model something that accounts for this spatial and differentiation between different groups.
Let me give you a moment of silence, Kurimeo. Be careful who you run to on the internet to prove your point. Your research is flawed. Be careful, because you might get whipped with your own source. Okay? Now, within the US, they found that mixing between African American ancestors and European ancestors largely took place in the pre-Civil War South. I wonder why. And for those who come on my channel and say, YK, you biased, man. You always talking about your African ancestry, but you did not. I never denied my European ancestry or my native ancestry. I always tell y'all, I know how it got there. I know that if my African ancestors wasn't brought and kidnapped and sold away from Africa, we would have never seen a Native American or had that Native ancestry in us, because the natives did own some of us, our ancestors. So pardon me if I'm not too fond of that history. Excuse me if I would rather accept the genetics that wasn't forced on my ancestors. Pardon me. I'm not knocking you for participating in that native ancestry side, but don't make claims that we were already here. Don't make claims that the slave trade never happened. Because when you do that, you slap our African ancestors and what they went through in the face in the African Holocaust. This is why I do what I do. Now let's keep going. It says, Graval noted that his team was lucky that these three cohorts were genotyped on either the Illumina Omni 2.5 or the Omni 1M. Using the RF mix modeling approach and additional data from 1,000 Genome Project.
The Human Genome Project allowed us to define essentially what a human genome looked like. What we didn't know from that information is how individuals differ from each other. So in the 1,000 Genomes Project, it's an effort to essentially sequence the genomes of many individuals and quantify the places in the genome where there's variation.
This looks like. Explain to us what we're looking at. We see Asia, we see Africa, we see Europe, and we see clustering. What does that tell us?
So each point on this graph represents a single genome that was sequenced by the 1,000 genomes. And the distances between points represent the similarity or difference between individual genomes. So if 2 points are quite close together, then those genomes are quite similar to each other. You might imagine that the people are reasonably closely related to each other. Whereas if they are more further apart, then these two individuals will be more distantly related. And so as you can see on this figure, there are sort of clusters of individuals that are, say, from the East Asian population, or from the African population, or from the European population, indicating that individuals share common ancestry in those populations.
Panels from Africa, Europe, and Asia, they identified the most likely continental ancestry for each locus for the individuals and their cohorts. All right. Now, for the health and retirement study cohort, which the researchers noted is widely representative of the entire African American population, they estimated that African Americans in the South have 83% African ancestry. Yo, it's literally what time is it, bro? It's literally like 5 a.m. right now, yo. It's 5 a.m. and I'm up giving y'all this work. It said they estimated that African Americans in the South have 83% African ancestry, while African Americans in the North and West have slightly smaller percentages of African ancestry, some 80% and 79% respectively. All right. So, you got beat up with your own source. And you can find this article. It's on genome.web. So I literally destroyed you, Kurimeo, with your own reference. Moment of silence. Moment of silence. You can no longer use that clip. Take it down, because this researcher, Simon Gravel, actually just backed what African Ancestry was telling them. Is that you are from Africa. You are from Africa. So, are they wrong? Are they wrong? Now, we're going to speak on what makes African ancestry different from the other DNA testing sites out there like 23andMe. I'm going to show you what makes African ancestry more reliable, more accurate. Now, it kills me how every time these so-called Indians try to debunk DNA, they always attack 23andMe. Okay? They never go to African ancestry. Somewhere in their brain, they think that African ancestry is the same as these other DNA companies. Okay? Even your source said it's based on who is being compared to.
They'll break down the cells so they can free the DNA, and then clean the DNA, break it into small pieces. And then they laid out on one of these chips here.
So if we look at that chip, will my spit on this chip tell me that definitively I am Italian or definitively I'm from wherever?
No. There's a lot of steps that go in between, a lot of statistical interpretation and models, and whose genome your genome is being compared to.
That's number one. Now, so why is African ancestry different from the rest of those DNA sites? Let's speak on it, bruh. For one, right, they give you specific country and tribe results.
With great pleasure that I report our patriclant analysis successfully identified your paternal genetic ancestry. By analyzing your Y chromosome DNA, we have determined that you share paternal ancestry with Fang people in Gabon today. Wow.
Right? Number two, they have the largest database of African genetic sequences.
Our database is one of the most comprehensive databases that's available. We have over 30,000 different West African lineages for mitochondrial DNA, which is maternally inherited, and the Y chromosome, which is paternally inherited. We have over 35 African countries that have been sampled, and we've worked with historians and archaeologists and anthropologists to help identify which populations were important for an African lineage database for African Americans.
Number three, they are Black owned.
Hi, I'm Gina Page, president and co-founder of AfricanAncestry.com. We are the pioneers of genetic ancestry tracing for Black people across the world. If you want to know the present day African country and African ethnic group or tribe that you share ancestry with, we're the only company that can give you that information.
All right. Number four, your privacy is everything. They just destroy 100% of your DNA. All right. Now, let's see what it means to have the largest database. Let's go. Now, they have the world's largest database of African lineages. 23andMe And all of these other sites do not have what African Ancestry have. They compare your DNA to over 33,000 lineages across 35 African countries. They are specifically tracing your African DNA. Other companies, they tell you a broad span and give you percentages. African Ancestry do not give you percentages.
These specific percentages should not be interpreted as like definitive, like here's your percentage ancestry from this place. Like that's not that.
They only tell you which tribe you come from. And the reason why they find that is based on the genetics of the people that are in that tribe today. So it is possible. The geneticist that Kurimeo shared didn't say it wasn't possible. He said it wasn't accurate based on who your genetics is being compared to. And African Ancestry has the largest database. And if you look at Kurimeo's video, right, you clearly see that it says Ancestry. It doesn't say African Ancestry. Okay? We create more meaningful connections to Africa and transformative experiences for those searching for a deep sense of identity. We help you discover the people, cultures, and traditions that truly help you remember and define who you are. Okay? Most of the popular genealogy test kits provide you with a percentage breakdown of your ancestry. African Ancestry is different. We provide your specific African country and tribe of a single lineage. We trace your ancestor by analyzing mitochondrial DNA or the Y chromosome, depending on your test kit. Both are passed on from generation to generation without changing for the past 500 to 2,000 years along a single lineage. All right? Using a simple cheek swab, we extract your DNA sequence representing by letters A, C, T, G. We look closely for unique markers or mutations in your sequence, and those are supplied in your results. Okay? I did my African Ancestry. I know. Then we compare them to our proprietary database of African lineage to determine your country and tribe of origin. Kurimeo, 23andMe is not African Ancestry. Kurimeo, all of those other 59.99 sites you go to is not African Ancestry. You pay a grip. You pay at least $200 to know this information, brother. Y'all got to stop with these lies. Okay? It's a lie. DNA testing is not for entertainment purposes only. You didn't hear the geneticists say that, though. The population geneticists that say that we come from Africa. You know the one who say that most natives are in the West? You know that one? So it's either you believe he's correct about the DNA, or you believe he's correct about the way. He can't be right on one and wrong on the other. That's how that works, buddy. He can't be right that DNA is a hoax and then be right that we come from Africa. The majority of black people in America today are from West Africa.